By
Christopher.
the way, Kelly, he wears better looking shirts than you do.
Save it. He's a Mr. Important guy. He's an important dude, man. He's a big fish, man. Couldn't get him. I'm glad he's here though. How you doing, Chris?
Good to be on with you boys. I appreciate you having me, man. Yeah, I can't turn down my former roommate on the road, my close friend. But I don't know how.
Uh-oh.
Oh,
What
no.
happened, Billy? Come on, Billy Jones.
Jeopardy, competed bowling, anything. There was an opportunity to keep score, and he and I were competing.
That's right. I was thinking the other day too when me and you used to golf, Chris. I don't think you can handle me now.
No,
dog.
I could not handle you then. I certainly can't handle you now.
Yeah, I've gotten a lot better, man. How was before we start? How was the All-Star game last night?
It was all right. It was cool. It was more of a, hey, let's go check it out kind of thing. I think the thing, we got to go, like the All-Star game used to be important. You remember like Pete Rose bowling the
Yes.
catcher
Oh,
back
yeah.
in the day. Like we were talking about this on our show the other day. Which All-Star game is the best? By far, it's still Major League Baseball. NFL All-Star game, the Pro Bowl has become a joke. NBA, you play no defense. At least, there's a facsimile of some sport that you're actually playing during the regular season. But why can't we go back to the days where one team, one league wears the home jerseys, whatever their home jersey is, you wear the whites, and then the road team wears their version of the road. Like they got these whacked out jerseys and hats. Like you don't even know who the players are. So
They look
we
like
left about the fifth inning. Obviously, all that stuff for apparel sales, but it was good to go out and maybe the highlight of the night was seeing Livy Dunn. That was probably the best part.
Kelly, this guy is way smarter than you.
Oh, there's no question. He's very intelligent, man. There's no question about that. Christopher, I told you the story that we used to go over to his house, his apartment every night, and that's how we kind of grew up together. Our families grew up together, and he would watch, we'd watch Jeopardy together, and the dude is like he's a nerd. He's a nerd.
It was fun,
He's
man.
a
We
nerd.
missed those days.
I know, man. So, hey, let's start off with this, man. Today, they had your team, they had your college, your university, but they had Alabama and Texas, and it seemed like Florida's kind of an afterthought.
Don't forget Mississippi
Chris,
State, too. Don't disrespect the Bulldogs. They were here, too.
No, I know. I'm with you. I'm with you. But, what is the state of the Florida Gators right now, man? Billy Napier is, I think he's a really good coach, man, but he struggled the last couple of years. He had some tight games that they were in last year against Missouri and LSU that they didn't pull out, Arkansas. What's the state of the Gators right now?
Yeah, it's the Gator fans are certainly pretty antsy for some success. It's tough watching your biggest rival have the success that Georgia's had the last couple seasons. When you go through the schedule, we've been talking an awful lot about how difficult Georgia's schedule is. And when we go through it, nobody mentions the cocktail party on November 2nd. Everybody's talking about, having to play at Ole Miss, having to play at home, or having to go to Alabama, but nobody's talking about the Gators. And that's kind of what the vibe was today. Alabama gets a lot of the talk. Certainly Texas coming into the league feels really big, but Florida's maybe even being talked about less than Mississippi State with a new coach and Jeff Lebby coming to the conference. So I would say that that's actually a position that I think Billy Napier relishes. I did their spring game. I had a chance to be around the players at practice, had a chance to talk to the coaches. They've done a lot to upgrade the talent. I think they've narrowed the talent gap a little bit from where it was last year. Went out and were very intentional about adding veteran players that have experience, 4th, 5th, 6-year guys in some cases. But I also think they grew up last season. Defensively, they had 25% of their snaps taken by true freshmen. That's a recipe for disaster in this conference. So those guys are better for what they went through last year, the growing pains that they suffered. And I think they're a lot better in terms of culture in the locker room as well, which is something that I know Billy Napier values greatly.
Chris, so Gator Nation, they want to win. And what do you give? He's on the hot seat this year, man. He's got to come up with something, don't you think? And like how many games, is going to be suitable for the Gator fans?
Yeah, so I think the question is not the number of wins. A lot of people have asked me that. I don't think there's a number. I think it's more about the aesthetics. Like, how does it look? Florida's looked like a disaster here recently with self-inflicted wounds and penalties. Remember the 2 number 3s on the field against Utah last year? You go back to the execution late in the game, 2-minute situation against Arkansas that looked like a debacle. The Florida State game where you got guys spitting in people's faces and extending drives. I mean, it has to look better. And I think Billy Napier's addressed a lot of the stuff. They made a bunch of changes on the defensive staff, brought in Ron Roberts, who, is the kind of the godfather of defense in this league. Austin Armstrong, the defensive coordinator, talks about Ron Roberts as his football father. So I think they've got, some nice changes there. But I think you also have to remember Florida's the roster was not great that Billy Napier inherited. So I think it's taken some time to turn that roster over. But I think everybody's talking about the challenging nature of the schedule too. And you look at it, and certainly traditionally those logos look pretty intimidating, but Billy Napier's, he's accepted that. He's not using it as an excuse. He's not trying to buy more time. He's saying, look, it's pretty similar to what we played last year. And it's actually a little bit more favorable because you get Miami coming to town instead of having to go to Utah in week 1. You get Kentucky coming to town instead of having to go to Lexington. You don't have to go to Baton Rouge. You get LSU to Gainesville without Jaden Daniels and 2 first-round receivers. You play Florida State without Jordan Travis. So, on surface level, it looks really challenging. I think everybody plays a challenging schedule in this league. But I honestly believe, Kelly, that at the end of the day, this Florida team is better than people are giving them credit for. I know you love Graham Mertz. Graham Mertz is a guy you have to admire for what he's been able to do in overcoming some challenging years at Wisconsin. I think Florida wins 7 games or more this year.
All right, nice. So with Oklahoma and Texas coming in, what do you foresee with that? I mean, you got these 2 behemoths coming from the Big 12.
Yeah.
That's the splash that they wanted. Greg Sankey's talked about it, but what are you thinking? Like Texas last year went down and had a monumental win when they go down to Tuscaloosa and they score more points than Nick Saban's ever had scored on him.
Yeah.
What do you think about these 2 teams coming into the league and how will they fare?
Let me say this. First and foremost, the Texas and Oklahoma brands fit perfectly into the league. Even more so being around Coach Sark today and Coach Venables yesterday, like they fit in as 2 of the alpha male coaches in this conference. It's filled with alpha males. So I think all of those things fit really well. But I think one of the dynamics that's interesting for me to look at is like everybody's talking about Texas and nobody's talking about Oklahoma. Oklahoma has been in a ton of these college football playoffs since its inception. Oklahoma has dominated the Texas Oklahoma Red River rivalry. 7 of the last 10 years have gone the Sooners' way, and yet we're still talking about Texas. And to your point, I think it's well deserved. Like Texas went in and had one of the most shocking victories of the season last year in Tuscaloosa, physically manhandling the Tide on their own field on both lines of scrimmage. They looked more athletic as well. That was one game. What I want to see from Texas is, can you do it week by week? This is a grind of a schedule playing in the SEC, not only physically but mentally. I'm interested to see both of these teams, how they handle that cumulative fatigue that sets in as you get towards late October and early November.
So, Chris, with all this stuff that's going on with leagues realigning, and the Big Ten is going and scooping up everybody. They're getting everybody they can. I said yesterday I thought the SEC is doing a good job of staying, geographically in the area, but the Big Ten is willing to go out and get everybody. But this realignment stuff is probably not over yet. And Greg Sankey is adamant about staying with 16 teams. But if the FSUs and the Clemsons are able to get out of that contract with the ACC, and then UNC and Miami, those are only 4 teams. But like, he's adamant about staying to 16. What do you think happens with all this realigning? And if those teams come up, does the SEC go in and gobble them up?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, I think Commissioner Sankey takes great pride in the contiguous footprint of the SEC. He mentioned it in his opening statement the other day. It talks about the Southeastern Conference being located in the southeastern portion of the United States. That's something that's important to him. But I also think what's important is he said we're 16 today and 16 tomorrow. Now, I don't know if that means tomorrow like forever or tomorrow and literally tomorrow you don't know what's going to happen beyond that. I think Florida State and Clemson, what do those 2 schools give you? I don't know why the only reason you would add them was to block the Big Ten from coming into your territory. But I don't know if there's anything gained by adding those 2 teams. I think, if there was ever any sort of additional growth in the conference, it would be a place like North Carolina or Virginia. I know those are 2 highly sought after, thought of schools and the academic standards and their commitment to athletics fit in. But I just don't know that Florida State and Clemson would be targets of the SEC if there was additional expansion.
So, you got to see Kalen DeBoer today. What are your thoughts on him, and does he keep Alabama rolling? I mean, he's George asked me earlier. I think all these coaches that were probably asked, there's like I said, like a high number, like 90% of the coaches, if they were asked, they would probably say, "Man, I don't want to get in that juggernaut."
Yep.
You're replacing a legend, and Kalen DeBoer. He's been a really good coach wherever he's been. He started at the lower level, and then he's won everywhere. What are your thoughts on that? Is Alabama just going to keep reloading? There's going to be some adjustment time, but what do you think about that hire?
Well, first and foremost, Kelly, I like you. I like guys that want that smoke, right? A couple years ago, it was Lincoln Riley running away from the SEC and Brian Kelly coming to the SEC with LSU. I certainly respect that. And I feel the same way about Kalen DeBoer at even a greater level. Like, I don't ever know that there's been a more difficult job in replacing a coach in the history of college football than finding somebody to replace the greatest to ever do it in Nick Saban. But yet, Kalen DeBoer was all about doing it. And Greg Byrne identified the perfect guy to come replace him. I mean, you're talking about a guy that's won at every level, every destination he's been at. It's incredibly different. The contrast between Nick Saban and Kalen DeBoer is considerable. Talking with some of the Alabama players today, about how different practices are. How I asked one of their players about, what's the biggest difference in coaching styles? Like, Coach DeBoer wants us to come talk to him, and he takes our ideas. Whereas, I know Coach Saban, he was pretty strict on doing it one way. So it's going to be done differently. I do think there may be a little bit of with Nick Saban, the floor was always like 10 wins. Like a bad season was 10 wins. I don't know if they win 10 games this year. 9 games could be more of the floor, maybe 8 if it doesn't go their way. But I do think they got the right coach. I think he's going to be put his own spin on things, and I'm excited to see particularly how he's able to develop Jalen Milroe. The guy's an amazing talent, as we saw last year. Throws the deep ball really well, runs the football with some of the called quarterback run and scramble stuff. But I want to see him be better with the short to intermediate throws. I want to see him anticipate better. I want to see him own things at the lines of scrimmage.
Billy, you hear that? That's exactly what I said about an hour ago with Jalen Milroe. Hey, my last thing, because I know these guys want to ask some questions, but the NIL, just talk a little bit about it. I mean, I've always said that kids need something. They need something, but, $1 million, $2 million, $750,000 paying a kid in college, man, that's tough. And I don't know where it goes. I know that's where it's been trending.
Yeah.
But what are your thoughts about that in the transfer portal?
Well, I think, why are we talking about putting a limit on what they can make? What I want to know is I want kids to be paid based upon what their value is. Yeah, the recruiting inducements, those types of things, that's against the rules. I want to see people pay for play is not what we're talking about. But if somebody truly can bring value to a company by doing an endorsement deal or making an appearance, that to me is what NIL is all about. What we're seeing with collectives, that's just another word for paying players, just to come play at your school. That's not the spirit of NIL. Now, I think one of the problems I have, guys, is the entitlement that some of these players have. It was the guys that came before them that they're benefiting from what guys like you and I, Kelly, did, guys before us did to get them to this point. They happen to be born at the right time. So this entitlement is something that I struggle with a little bit. But I think fans in general, there's this talk of disenchantment as it relates to not, being as passionate about college football anymore. The NIL stuff throwing fans off, the transfer portal, the lack of any sort of allegiance to one particular school, what's going on with the NCAA and Congress, all this stuff, a lot of turmoil. But I don't remember a more anticipated season than what we're heading into here in the SEC, with Oklahoma, with Texas, with the expansion of the playoff field to 12. I just think this is one that we've finally gotten past all the offseason stuff, and we can focus on the season at hand. And I think there's a lot of anticipation right now.
So, Chris, a year ago at the end, nobody in their right mind wanted to play Missouri. They ripped into Tennessee and Columbia. They kind of ripped into Ohio State in the Cotton Bowl. And I loved Brady Cook. Man, I thought he was terrific.
Yeah.
Can they sustain that?
It's funny because I think we're talking an awful lot about Ole Miss. Like Ole Miss is the team that I feel is under a lot of pressure. The expectation level's high for Lane Kiffin. They've won 10 games in 2 of the last 3 seasons. And yet Missouri had just as many wins as Ole Miss did last year. They both win 11 games. They both return their starting quarterbacks. They both have dynamic receivers. Like, why are we not talking about Missouri a little bit more? I think it just doesn't, kind of fit the narrative. Missouri is maybe not as sexy as the Lane Kiffin-led Ole Miss Rebels, but I think people need to be talking about Missouri a lot more. And I think they need to be talking about Brady Cook. I mean, this is a season that's filled with a lot of returning experience, headline names at the quarterback position. And you could probably rank the top 5 very differently. I've seen some rankings. I feel like Carson Beck and Quinn Ewers are at the top. I've seen some that have changed things up a little bit and had Jalen Milroe at the top. Saw one the other day that had Brady Cook at the top. And I don't think a lot of people would think that. I've heard Connor Wegman being a first-round pick after this season's all said and done. But I think Brady Cook's a guy that's kind of being overlooked for what he did last year. Was fantastic in Kirby Moore's offense. I think having Luther Burden, who is probably the best dynamic weapon in this league away from the quarterback position. I think he's the maybe, if we weren't talking about Heisman Trophy favorites, if we got rid of the quarterbacks, Luther Burden would be a nice dark horse guy to take to have some favorable odds there. The whole receiver group with Mookie Cooper and Theo Weiss, like they've got some dudes on that team. The defense does lose Blake Baker, which I think was a loss for them and a gain for Brian Kelly and LSU. But I do expect Missouri to be right back in the mix. Their schedule is pretty favorable. I wouldn't be surprised to see them win 10 games and make that 12-team field.
Because they're on day 4, nobody's said a word about Auburn yet. People know that Hugh Freeze is a really good recruiter. But are you like me and you're like, I'm not sure about Peyton Thorne?
Yeah, I did their spring game, and I opened that, that old song, you say a lot by saying nothing at all. The fact that they didn't go out in the transfer portal and bring in another quarterback tells you what they think about Peyton Thorne and what his potential is. Talked to Coach Freeze when I was there on the Plains in April for that game, and he said, look, I believe in Peyton Thorne. You go back and look at the most successful stretch of games that Peyton Thorne had last year. It was when Hugh Freeze was more involved in the quarterback development, some of the play calling stuff. Philip Montgomery, the offensive coordinator last year, is out. As I talked to Coach Freeze, he said, I didn't even know the language. I didn't know what was going on. And I've always thought, like, if you make your way through the college football, the coaching ranks, to make it to a place like Auburn, why would you give up what got you there in play calling duty and developing quarterbacks? So he's reinserted himself a little bit more with that in that quarterback room. He believes he can get the best out of Peyton Thorne. He's going to be a little bit more involved in the play calling, although the offensive coordinator, Coach Nix, is tasked with that job. I think you'll see Coach Freeze doing a little bit more of that. But they also have to surround Peyton Thorne with some better talent. And I don't know if you guys have seen Cam Coleman or not. Cam Coleman was hyped up as one of the top recruits coming out of high school last year. I saw this dude in the spring game. He is legit in terms of body type and ball skills, and he is going to be a big factor in whether or not this Auburn offense, particularly what Peyton Thorne's able to do this year.
I'm going to turn it to Billy Derrick here in just a second, but off the top of your head, what is the worst thing that Kelly Holcomb has ever called you?
He uses like goofy names like slap nuts and like yeah. I mean, I don't know if we're allowed to cuss on here. Yeah, he used to be in the pods. Like I grew up with Eddie Murphy, like Eddie Murphy Ross. So I talk like a real athlete in the locker room. I use the F word, I MF some things. Like Kelly won't. He gives you these like quasi like O'Doul's cuss words. It's goofy, man.
Beverly Hillbillies.
Yeah, this guy,
Chris.
he's the Andy Griffith guy. Like this guy loves the Andy Griffith show. It's right up his alley.
Okay, Billy.
Chris, Tennessee, saw your buddy Greg McElroy say Nico Iamaleava could potentially be a Heisman Trophy candidate. He has them as a top 10 team. Are you in the same belief that Tennessee is elite this year?
I am. I had a chance to be in Knoxville for Tennessee's Pro Day, and on that very same morning, they had their first scrimmage of the spring. I go out there in Neyland Stadium. Nico Iamaleava doesn't look like the skinny kid that was running the offense in the bowl game against Iowa. Put on about 15 to 20 pounds, looks more sturdy. He's like 6'5", 6'6". Big presence there behind the center. But I watched the ball come out of his hands, man. He's got a great delivery. The ball's got some tight revs on it. But I think the thing about Tennessee's offense this year that'll be better is the group of receivers around him. Brew McCoy comes back from that gruesome injury that he suffered last year. Squirrel White gives you a little contrast with his little smaller kind of slot kind of feel to what he does as well. But they got some really good weapons to help out Nico Iamaleava, and I think the defense will be better. For those that haven't seen James Pierce Jr., you'll see a lot of him in opposing backfields this year, and you'll see a lot of him as we talk about the NFL draft lead up next year. I think he's probably a top 5, top 10 dude in the in NFL draft in April.
All right, this might be hard, but give some hope to Vandy fans after what Clark Lee and that staff did in the offseason.
Golly, I love Clark Lee. I've come to know him over the last few years. I have such great respect for him. You know, I played for a guy in Steve Spurrier that played at his alma mater and came back, or played at his school, came back to coach at his alma mater, and what that meant to him. And I know coaching at Vanderbilt's very special for Clark Lee. You know, it's just like they're forever having to play with one hand tied behind their back. Now they finally put in some money into the infrastructure of the stadium there. Everybody forever has clowned them for not having any upgrades to their stadium since 1982. Now everybody's clowning them for having cranes holding up their scoreboards. It'll be better, but I think they have to give the people in Nashville something to want to come out for. Just because you build a new stadium or make some additions to a new stadium doesn't mean they're going to come. You got to have a great product on the field. And I thought at the end of the 2022 season, they were making some progress. In November, they beat Kentucky. They beat Florida. You feel like you got something. And then last year they took a major step back. I think for Vanderbilt, it comes down to, two things that have been elusive from them. The last 5 or 6 years have been tough on Vandy. That's Clark Lee's tenure and the end of the Derek Mason tenure. But if you go back to the beginning of Derek Mason's time and even James Franklin's before that, what could we always depend on with Vanderbilt? Defensive play. They were always salty on that side of the ball. And they always had a quarterback, whether we're talking about Jordan Rodgers or Jay Cutler, or, some of those guys. They haven't had great quarterback play, and the defense has really let them down. So I think that's going to be the determining factor. Can they make some headway? Vegas doesn't think so. They got them at 2.5 wins. But I think they'll actually be a little bit better than that. Now, I don't know how much that gives you hope, but I do think that it's all about having some patience with Vanderbilt because it's not an overnight fix.
Kelly, we've got to say goodbye quick, but I can't believe you called him. I can't believe you called him a slap nuts.
Is that not right?
I've called him other things too. I promise.
Hey, I love this guy. This guy's one of my all-time favorite people, one of my great friends, and miss him and Lori and the whole family, man. Thank you guys for having me.
Chris, thank you for coming on. Thank you.
I know we got to go, but I'm a granddad. I'll send you pictures.
Oh, congratulations, old guy! Finally looking like your hair looks now. You got your grandfather matching that hair, right?
Hater.
I love you, bro.
I don't color mine. Hoss.
I just color the sides. I just color the sides, not the top.
See you, man. Love you.
See you.